All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're looking at Standard W93, which says analyze the reactions of the surrounding Arab countries on the UN's decision to establish Israel and the 4 Arab-Israeli wars. We're going to be talking about 3, and rise of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. This information has been keeping me up at night, and you can take this as far as you want to go. I would find out another piece of information, and I would do some research and find out this, and it just keeps on going. And there's just so much bias around all of this information, and it was hard to find unbiased information. But I feel like this presentation has good information in it, and I'm going to have some questions for you in the Canvas thing, and also on this presentation. So. All right, let's get started. The Arab-Israeli conflict is different from the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and you'll see why at the end of this thing. All right, so all of this starts in 1897. I don't have the date up there, but that's Theodor Herzl. He is the leader of the political movement for the Jewish people to have their own nation. He had said, we have been ridiculed, and we have been punished and pummeled, and we have to move from place to place. And the only place that we feel safe is amongst our own people, and we need a nation. That was in 1897. There was a couple of people who adopted that idea, mainly Eastern European Jews. And the reason that I put this second bullet in here, the Jews had suffered several diasporas. A diaspora is where people move. They disperse. They move. So the Jewish people had moved from Jerusalem and Israel several times. They had been expelled by the Assyrians. They had been expelled by the Babylonians, and then the Romans, and so on and so forth. And during the Middle Ages, they kind of stay put, and 2 different divisions of Jewish nationalities start to form up: the Sephardic Jews in Spain and Portugal and North Africa, and the ones in Eastern Europe. So when does it become serious here? When does it really happen? The Cold War in Israel. This is when it really happens for Israel, because after World War II, they gain their own nation in 1947. The UN comes in and they say, here's what it's going to look like. Actually, this is how we're going to divide it up. The UN, they said, all of this right here that's a light color was going to belong to Israel, and the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights was going to go to the Palestinians. Okay? And the Palestinians were Muslim and claim to be Arab, but research that I've done, it seems like they come from more of the Aegean Islands than they would be from the Arabian Peninsula, but that's a whole different issue. So this is what it looked like after World War II. They come in and they form. They say, Israel, this is for you. This is for the Jews. This area right here, and that's all fine and dandy, right? So, no, not really. What happens is this looks like a huge colonial movement by the Western powers to the Arab nations that are all around here. All of these nations are going, Israel's backed by France and Great Britain and the United States, and here they form this nation up. It is definitely a Western colony. And from immediately in 1949, all of these Arab nations that are around Israel declare war on Israel. Israel is backed by a lot of firepower. So they are able to fight back with extreme prejudice because they've got Western powers on their side, and they quickly defeat the Arab nations that are around them. Okay? So going back to this, after World War II, and this is another proxy, all right, of the superpowers. The Russians use the Arab nations as their proxy. The United States uses Israel for their proxy. And so when it came to the Middle East, the U.S., which contained a large Jewish population, gave the Jewish state of Israel military and economic support. Okay? And the Soviets used the Arab nations. And this is where they made threats against one another, including the racking up of allies all over the world. Now it gets serious between, you've already learned about Abdel Nasser and how he fought back against Israel. In 1967, Nasser begins making threats against Israel, and Israel just goes off the hizzy and starts to fight back. They actually start to invade these different areas, and it was called the 6 Days War. Israel invades these areas that are on the map here. You can pause this if you need to write that stuff down, but I'll show you here on the map. On the 6 Days War in 1967, Israel pushes all the way to here. They capture the Sinai Peninsula. They capture the Gaza Strip. They take the West Bank and Jerusalem, which was supposed to be an international zone for everybody. And they also go ahead and push into Syria and take the Golan Heights. Now, this is called the West Bank because it's on the west side of the Jordan River. All right, so they take all of this back, and now the Palestinians are absolutely helpless, and they are at the mercy of the Israeli army. And some ugly things happen there. So that was called the 6 Days War, and Israel takes all this stuff back, and they keep it until the 1970s when the Egyptian president Anwar Sadat, he wants revenge for the 6 Days War, and he invades Israel on their most holiest of days called Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the day that you're supposed to be most close to God. All right? No distractions. So what a great day to invade when everybody's worshiping. And the Israelis were caught completely by surprise, and the Arab forces were successful in reclaiming some of the Sinai Peninsula. That's what they had lost to. The Egyptians had lost that to the Israelis. After the war, Israel sent troops to invade that resided in Lebanon because there was a new movement in the 1960s called the Palestinian Liberation Organization. That was the PLO. And to take out the new Palestinians, and this just made Israel seem more like a bully in the eyes of many Arab nations, especially the U.S. supporting this and many of their decisions. And we still back Israel on a lot of decisions. So the problem is, when you're looking at the problems in Israel and Palestine, the Palestinians don't have a nation that they can call their own. They feel like Israel and the Jewish people came in and just took their land from them. Okay? So, being backed by the Arab nations, the Arabs said, how can we truly affect change with these Western powers and help the Palestinians? You guessed it, what we talked about in the previous video. Oil. So, during that Yom Kippur War, which Anwar Sadat will gain a little bit of success, but not much. Once the U.S. got involved, they pushed the Egyptians back out. Okay, but during that, this OPEC, you may have heard of OPEC, it's the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, announced that they were severely reducing oil production. They said this will get them right here. So in 1973. These places I told you where the American investors were investing in oil wells, the nations of Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and a couple others there in the Middle East, Iraq and Iran, they cut off oil to, especially to the United States. And this affected the whole globe as there were shortages. And OPEC showed the world that we can bring the economy to its knees if you don't start negotiating with us. So as the years passed, the number of Palestinians living throughout Gaza and the West Bank increased. The PLO, headed by Yasser Arafat, you'll see him in the video that I have, worked to try to reestablish the Palestinian state in Israel. the goal starting out of the PLO was to completely destroy Israel, but they became more and more progressive and liberal, and that wasn't good enough for some groups that were in the Gaza Strip. And Gaza is a tragedy, and you're going to see that in the video, because Gaza has been completely walled off by Israel. Israel won't let people in and out of there at all. In the decades of the 80s and 90s, early 2000s, the Arab nations kind of made peace with Israel. So all those poor Palestinians, they no longer have anybody to back them. They don't have powerful Arab nations behind them anymore, even though the Palestinians claim to be Arab. There's nobody to help them, and they're at the mercy of Israel. And that's why it's called now, it's called the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's no longer the Arabian-Israeli conflict. Okay, so there's the difference. I have that wrote here for you. It's still going on. Excuse me. Huge injustices on both sides. It reminds me a lot of, because Israel built a wall around Gaza, just like we're trying to build a wall on our southern border against Mexico, but Israel will cross that border and go get cheap labor and bring it across into Israel, and then once they want to boot them, they take them back across, kind of like we do immigrant workforce here. So the last thing I want to ask you is are these questions? I want you to look at those and answer them in text form, and paragraph or two is fine. Guys, if you're interested in this stuff, you can take it as far as you want to. I'm interested in it just because I'm thinking, how can you fight for centuries and centuries on end? What is the big deal? And the more you research, the more you find out. And it's hard to find unbiased information on this stuff. So always ask me. I have spent hours. I know you don't have that because you're a high school student. If you have questions, let me know, because I've researched this stuff for hours on end to try to bring you the most unbiased and unprejudiced information that I can find. And just hours of I've got hours upon hours of just been writing. All right. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm here. I've got all the information. I'll have 5 to 10 questions and a couple of short answers. Okay, and I'm here for you if you need me.